I do want to talk about immigration reform, but maybe give you some context. I've been involved in every bipartisan effort in the last Congress. Many I was in the negotiation process with, and one or two I consider myself somebody just contributing in a minor way. You think about the CHIPS Act, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, the bipartisan community safety bill, the respect for marriage bill, and I stand by all of them. And I believe that they're policies that are going to age well, and we're measuring them, and we know that they're going to age well. The fear, uncertainty, doubt from some of the opponents simply hasn't materialized, and what we expected to get accomplished already is. And when I look at things, I had Gary Robertson, who's I think with the AP down in Raleigh, covered when I was speaker after I think it was the respect for marriage bill. He asked a question that suggested that somehow I'd had a revelation and stopped being a fire-breathing conservative and started being a moderate. And I told Gary, I said, Gary, you've been following the legislature longer than I've been in politics. You need to go back and remember what I did when I was a freshman Republican. The first time I parted with my members originally to get engaged in negotiations to make a bad bill much better. And think about renewable portfolio standard and a number of other things that could have destroyed our state. Being at the table meant that we were at the table, not on the table. And then I went through this succession of things that I've done. So I asked him, I said, how is that any different than what I'm trying to do up here? Try to bridge the gap and make positive change, make incremental change. That's why I'm here. And then we get to immigration reform. Now think about this. In June of last year, over a 30-day period, we had what has been characterized as a once-in-a-generation community safety bill. Foundation of that is mental health, which is already bearing fruit. Enhanced background checks for under 21s. But we got that done in 30 days. And it's characterized as a once-in-a-generation bill. Then you move on to respect for marriage. It's never been done before. Took a few more months, but we got it done. Those are extraordinary bills that were very contentious. And yet, immigration reform is even more difficult. And why is it difficult? Because people are not looking at it in terms of the valid arguments at either end of the spectrum. The first thing that I've told, and I'm thrilled to see even yesterday, I was at a group called TechNet, and I love the fact that I think they're beginning to listen to what I say. People come at this from two perspectives. You got to seal the border. I'm not talking about anything else until you do that. You've got to do immigration reform. The border's okay, or we can deal with it. It's not a problem. Really. 500,000 encounters at the border in the last year of the Trump administration. 3 million over the last 12 months. And that number is likely to be sustained or even increase. We have a crisis at the border. And we know that it's manageable because we haven't passed a law to change our border policy. We just have an administration that took down constitutionally sound policy that managed the situation at the border. And incidentally, we had it manageable with a porous border. We need more work there, but we were managing it. The Border Control Council says that if they have 500,000 encounters a year and they have border security deployed to the border, not babysitting, driving buses, pushing paper, then that is a manageable inflow. But now we have 3 million. We'll probably have another 3 million. The border is a disaster. So is our immigration policy. For people, countless people, I don't have a meeting. The first thing I do when I go into any meeting is to say, I'm sure you guys don't have a problem with labor, so what else do you want to talk about? Whether it's H-1B at the high end. I mean, we just passed $52 billion, discounted somewhat for a labor focus. So let's say it's $40 billion is going to be used to build fabs. In the semiconductor industry alone, they're going to need 10,000 jobs, engineers in that space for that one segment. And then people say we need to have more STEM. Yeah, but if we just had more STEM and how long have we been talking about STEM and STEAM education curriculums? If you, in your wildest dreams, thought that we passed the perfect legislation today to get people who are born and raised in the United States with degrees and advanced degrees, and it was transformational, it would take us a generation before we started seeing a steady flow. So what do we do in the interim? We decide not to have people who are vetted, who have advanced degrees and skills, and say we're going to eliminate the possibility for growth now for something that we haven't proven to get done over time. We still need to work on it. But it's a fallacious assumption that suddenly we just get everybody interested in math and science, and that suddenly we're going to have all of these unfilled jobs filled. Similarly, at the other end of the spectrum, we are going to, the first time in our history, be a net importer of food in this country. And if anybody needs to be reminded of how food supply chains and food security are important, go back and look at the empty shelves when we were in the midst of COVID. Canned goods, produce, meats, y'all have to remember it. I mean, I cook a lot. I go to the grocery store a lot. I'm a just-in-time sort of person. I never have something until about 3 hours before I'm going to make my wife a meal. But there were just no options. And now we're going to implement a policy that makes it likely that for the next decade that we could be a food importer, that we're going to prevent planting and harvesting crops because farmers simply do not have the labor to do it. Agriculture is not near as mechanized as you think. There are delicate fruits, tomatoes. There are certain commodities that we grow at scale that require labor. And so how do you combine those two and make something happen? Well, number one, you just have to tell somebody that says, Tom, I agree we got to get immigration, but only until we pass a bill that seals the border. I say, great, that'll fail. And then I have other people saying, I think the border's okay, we need to tune the dials, but I'm not going to get on any border security until we address the immigration problem. That'll fail too. That's not hypothetical. It's failed every time people have tried to do it. And then you have other people saying, well, you just got to get away from comprehensive. There's no way to fix this unless you have both parts of the both those variables in the equation. No way to solve the problem without both those variables being solved. So I'm doing now what I call missionary work. I'm going to get on my donkey, I'm going to trot over to the House, and I'm going to see what the art of the possible is. I've got to see whether or not members are willing to have the courage to step up and recognize they're smart people. They really understand that none of this can get done unless we bridge the gap. They can get studied up on the details that I've focused on for the last 8 years since I've been here, and really even back when I was in the legislature. We just got to figure out if we can have a rational moment and let this be a Congress to get something done that is in fact more difficult than a once ever and a once in a generation bipartisan bill that I worked on, two of the bills that I worked on the most in terms of the bipartisan bills last year. But back to the business, I want people who are driven mainly by immigration reform to talk about the need for border reform. I want people with border reform to talk about the need for immigration reform. I want to be able to tune the demand for future work visas, guest programs, green cards for people with advanced degrees to our needs. I don't want to open up the door and let everybody in. I want to let enough in to make sure that every job that could possibly be filled that's not being filled by someone who is an American citizen gets filled. What's wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with it. And it's going to produce an economic impact that can actually help us, particularly in these times. We have thousands of jobs open. Hundreds of thousands of jobs open. And they're not going to be filled unless we use a little bit of rational thought in solving this problem. So over the next, actually I will have to tell you, last year, I do agree with the unsung hero. She even proved her worth about 15 minutes ago. When I came in here, the first thing she did is bring me, I promised I'm dry to July, and I'm also sort of on a keto diet, so I don't know what it is. It's sort of a hybrid for me. But So I'm pretty selective about what I eat. But she brought me a plate with everything I had on it. What I particularly liked, she had a dollop of hash browns because she knows I like them. It's about that big. I said, I'm not going to eat that. I already ate this morning. But then I actually interrupted Dave. It was very rude. I was about to sit down, and he was introducing himself, and I said, I'm sorry, I'll be right back. I went over to Angela. I said, would you go over to that fruit tray and pick out every single blackberry that's in there? And she did that for me. But I also want to talk about staff, the staff in the room. Doing bipartisan work is not particularly hard for me, because if I believe in the policy, I'm going to trudge through it. But it's really hard on staff. You know, if you think about it, for every one conversation I have about it, any given staff has 10 or 20. And then with the way that I work, which is highly disruptive, you know, going beyond the line that I really want to go to with the view that I can probably get back to where I want to be if I'm willing to be provocative, that can be scary for staff. And sometimes I don't even tell them what I'm doing because I may be doing something that is, you know, risk involved. I don't want them, what I've got them doing, don't want them to be influenced by other things that I'm doing, moving around the board. And they have to deal with that. So after the Respect for Marriage Act, I told them all, I said, guys, particularly my chief and my LD, I said, okay, look, I am done with bipartisanship of this Congress, with the possible exception of immigration reform. And I told Mitch McConnell the same thing about a week or two earlier. But you really can't do this unless you have your staff in line with your thinking. And your staff trusting you to kind of do some other things that they may or may not know about. So when I look at these accomplishments, excuse me, I look at my staff. Any questions?
Wow. Kathleen, you did such a great job with your intro. You get the very first question. And do we have a microphone for you?
Thank you. Okay, I think this will be a fairly easy question.
My favorite color?
No, well, that's a good question. Even though this is a very difficult subject for sure, but what would you say is the biggest struggle between border security and immigration reform? Like, in terms of trying to find a path forward?
Get people to wake up to facts. I mean, how can you, if you look at just look at a few things that I just find it hard for any rational person to push back on. I apologize in advance if y'all work for anybody that I'll be talking to, but how can you, I mean, we have use cases, right? We know policies that have been challenged in the court, proven constitutional, worked under Trump. 100,000 or 500,000 encounters. The only thing that's changed is the administration in Mayorkas. So they clawed back Safe Third Country. They clawed back Remain in Mexico. They clawed back any kind of work we were doing on asylum reform. You do need to have the calming device of detention. And you can explain why when these things, when this administration, there's a direct correlation between the clawback of the Trump policies, the implementation of the Biden policies, and the encounters that we have there. It's indisputable. It's not like we had a major war conflict in the Triangle countries down in Central America, and suddenly people are fleeing that country, and they're all coming, let's say 80% of them are fleeing a war zone to come here. That sort of event didn't occur. We are seeing increased numbers of Ukrainians and Russians, incidentally, at the southern border, Chinese at the southern border. But there's nothing that you can say, there's no valid basis for saying that this happened because of some other external event out of our control. It happened because of clawback of policies that were working. Now, some people would say they're heartless. Let's talk about asylum reform. If you're in China and you want to illegally cross the border at our southern border, you pay on average about $50,000. That is the going price for the cartel. The cartels are advertising in countries saying, we can get, I'm not kidding, we can get you to the United States. Here's the formula if you're from China. You get a connection that gets you into Mexico City. You take a connection from there to Mexicali, which is it's actually controlled by the Jalisco. It's the Jalisco Nueva Generation, which means the new stoned generation. I just found that out by chatting with ChatGPT that I do frequently. I do. Actually, even I'll tell you about a tech story with my wife if I have time. But the new stoned generation, which covers Mexicali, connects with somebody from China who has to transit through at least one, if not two or three, countries that are safe third countries before they go to Mexicali and they cross the border and they're processed in the Yuma sector. I'm saying, guys, if they were fleeing China because they had a credible fear claim, why not go to a country that has an international treaty on asylum and claim asylum? They're abusing our asylum laws. And then my ARCIS will sit there and say, well, these poor people are paying $50,000 to go from China, transit through a couple of other countries, safe third countries. These poor people need to come to the United States. That is not what asylum is meant for. It is meant for getting you out of a dangerous situation into the safest jurisdiction to apply for asylum. And if you later want to apply for citizenship in the United States, get in line. That's one example. I can give you a lot.